Welcome back to Monday Musings, a casual conversation about culture and theology. I'm Justin Ely.
And I'm Daniel Chen. We're just a couple guys talking about some stuff.
The stuff we have been talking about, we're calling Christian clubs. We're doing a series on denominations. Been pretty fun so far.
Yeah, it's been really good. I think we've, thank you guys for all the feedback given to us. I think this is it's been a really helpful one for us to do.
Yeah.
But I've heard it's been pretty helpful too because there's just so many denominations out there. And if you grew up in church, you kind of know your denomination, but you probably still don't know everything that your denomination believes.
Right.
And you definitely don't know about other denominations.
For sure.
And so, just hopefully this is a helpful way for us to understand one another better and to help you with discernment on how to interact with other denominations, but also for unity purposes too.
For sure. Yeah, I was at a pastor's fellowship a couple weeks ago, and we were talking about denominationalism, and the guy leading the meeting at the end was like, well, Justin, you're the resident expert on denominations. Why don't you pray for us? And I was like, no, I'm not. What are you talking about? And then it was like 2 days later where I was like, oh, he listened to the podcast. So thank you, Aaron Minikoff, for your well-timed humor.
Yes. Yeah, and Aaron has been really a mentor to you, and he was my history of Christianity professor. I learned a lot from his class.
He's a great guy. If you live near the Smyrna Vinings area, Mount Vernon Baptist Church, great church to go to.
Yeah.
Aaron Minikoff
for sure.
is the pastor.
Yeah, we love them over there.
Yeah, they're fantastic.
And they got this great basketball court that we used to play basketball at, too.
It's your dream come true,
It is,
man.
man. I just want a basketball court, yeah.
But before we get into our Christian clubs topic today, we start with the listener of the month.
So the listener of the month, there's a lot of listeners of the months we could choose from, but this one particular this month is Dana Ridenauer. And Dana, I hope I'm saying your last name correctly, Ridenauer, but he is in charge of finances at Mount Pisgah School, has been a long-time listener. He did work out with us, and I think has started to work back out with us with a group called F3, and his nickname is Zool.
Zool.
From Ghostbusters. There is
you
no
go.
Dana, only Zool. So that's where it comes from. So, Dana, thank you for listening and being a faithful listener for us and the encouragement that you give. So we
Thanks, Dana. Listener of the month.
Listener of the month.
June 2022. So today we are talking about Christian clubs. We're talking about denominations, and the denomination we will be talking about today are the Anglicans.
Yeah. There's a few Anglican churches in the Atlanta area that I know of.
Yeah.
But this is a denomination I knew nothing about, like literally zero until probably college or right after college.
I feel like around when we were in college, and maybe it was just a perception thing, so I don't know if this is true, but it kind of felt like Anglicanism was making a comeback.
Yeah.
Like
if you're Anglican, let us know
Yeah.
if that's true. But it did kind of feel like that, didn't it?
It almost feels like what our generation went through, we went through in the 90s and the early 2000s, I think was like the peak of the seeker-sensitive movement. And so we grew up in that. And then I think a lot of people in our generation just got burned out of like the overly produced lack of depth, lack of like historical ties to the church, like historical church.
Yeah.
And I feel like a lot of people went Anglican because they found like simplicity, they found liturgy,
Yeah.
they found like deep-rooted historical traditions. I don't know if that's true, it's just a perception that
Yeah, that got me going. I love generational theory, and I think it's like anything else, like a personality test. If you put too much stock into it, it's bad. But I think there's just some interesting tidbits, and there's one called the Strass generational theory. And if you're interested in it, I would look into that. It's very interesting on how generations, every 18 to 20 years, why every other generation is similar.
Sure.
But it's also cycles of 4 and what they're looking for and how they do it. And one of the things I've drawn out from looking at it is how, millennials, older, like Gen X, older millennials, like the experience, right? And so when we were coming up through the late 90s, early 2000s. It was all about the seeker-sensitive experience, right? But the thing is, with technology and all this stuff, you have you don't have to go to church to have an experience anymore. You can get that on YouTube. You can get it anywhere.
Yep.
And so I feel like with some, starting like around when we were coming through college, it went back to, instead of an experience, you want something authentic,
Right.
real,
Right.
So it's very interesting.
Yeah.
And it could be finding Anglicanism was a way, to see that.
Yeah.
So
yeah, I mean, it just seems like it did happen. I don't know. But we're using Trevin Wax's Gospel Coalition article, Quick Guide to Christian Denominations, kind of as our quick guide. And we'll post that in the show notes as we've been doing. But the name, Anglican Communion is the official name. It's the third largest international Christian family of churches with congregations in more than 165 countries. I think this is another thing that people like about Anglicanism, something I like about Methodism, is it's a global movement. It's a global family. And you have I think this is true. Probably shouldn't say something on a podcast that you think is true, but I've heard there are more Anglicans in Nigeria than in the United Kingdom.
Huh.
It is a very global
That's cool.
movement. So 165 countries. I mean, that's pretty impressive. So history of Anglicanism, part of the Protestant Reformation. The Church of England separated from the Roman Catholic Church in 1534. Didn't have something to do with some guy who wanted a divorce from some girl and couldn't get it?
I think it was Henry VIII.
Your Highness.
I think the Pope or the bishop wouldn't grant him a divorce, and he was like, I'm the king.
Start my own church.
I just start my own church.
Yeah. So,
I'm not sure that's the best way to start a church.
Right. Yeah, in the church planting class I took, that wasn't one of the methods for beginning a church.
Yeah.
But it's a good example of what man meant for evil, God meant for good,
right?
And God uses broken people and broken situations to bring about the expansion of His kingdom. So. The expansion of Anglicanism, therefore, coincided with the spread of the British Empire in the centuries following.
Yeah.
And the 39 Articles of 1571 defined the beliefs of the church. So, yeah. I mean, when you think about Methodism and John Wesley's coming out of an Anglican kind of background, so you see kind of the spread of denominations that way.
Yeah. And I think it's interesting because so far, most of the denominations we've talked about have been started by people like John Wesley, for example, who was like a preacher, right?
Right.
I think Anglicanism is pretty unique. Well, first of all, it's got that same root word with like Anglo, it's like England, right?
Sure.
But it was started by a king. So, I mean, I feel like that's pretty interesting,
Yeah.
and talk about Americans are all about the separation of church and state. Think about when that started, how literally as far as you could get away from church
Right.
and state. Yeah.
Yeah. So interesting kind of thinking, different kind of background. But what is the church like? Very formal liturgical services, culminating in the celebration of the Lord's Supper. Book of Common Prayer guides the Anglican worship services, written by Thomas Cranmer. Am I saying that right? I always feel it's just a weird last name.
I always think it's funny
Cranmer.
when you look at me to tell you how to say a word. I'm not the words guy here.
Cranmer. So it's a very liturgical kind of experience. Anglican worship services, or churches sometimes have statues and paintings, incense and candles, and some others do not. So like the U.S. Anglicans that I've been aware of don't have any of that stuff typically.
Yeah, it's
pretty simple is what I've observed.
Yeah, I've only been to 2 Anglican churches. One is Church of the Apostles.
Oh, they're Anglican.
I'm pretty sure they're Anglican.
Oh.
And it'll be interesting, too, because as we talk about the theology, I'm pretty sure, you kind of have, a conservative, like traditionally conservative, stream, and then you have a more liberal stream. And I'm like 90% sure Church of the Apostles is Anglican, and they have like more traditional type church. It's like big and ornate.
Yeah.
But none of the things that we talked about, like the statues and stuff. I mean, I've only been there a couple times, so I don't remember. But then I've been to Trinity Anglican. Have you been there?
Yeah, that's
like
experience.
Hip. It's like
it is hip, but it's also pretty simple from my memory.
It is. It's like a cool city church.
Yeah.
Right. And so
I was wearing a polo and khakis walking in. I knew I can't stay here. Just
your jeans weren't tight enough or
right.
whatever.
It
Yeah.
just wasn't for me.
Every church has liturgy, but they were more. I feel like both services are more liturgical than if you would go to like some of the mega churches around this area, but not like a Catholic church, So
Right. Yeah. So interesting. There was a big to do, I guess, when Beth Moore recently left Southern Baptist life or whatever that she'd been a part of for years and has joined an Anglican church. And she said she found like a lot of comfort in the liturgy.
Interesting.
As someone who experienced very stereotypical 20th century Southern Baptist churches, which has like zero liturgy at all, she said it was both like very uncomfortable and very like comforting to
Interesting.
her. So, yeah, definitely more liturgical than Baptist or non-denominational church typically. All right, so polity. So Anglicanism looks a little bit like Catholicism in organizational structure. There's an archbishop presiding over other bishops, who then preside over priests and deacons in local congregations. The Archbishop of Canterbury is the senior bishop and is like the symbolic head, but he's listed as like first among equals. And then the Queen is like what did you look up? The defender of the faith or something?
Yeah, so there's two main archbishops. One is of Canterbury and one is of York. But the Canterbury has precedence over the Archbishop of York. You know what's interesting? As an uncultured American, I hear these things and they sound fake to me.
Like, surely not.
Like Archbishop of York, like that doesn't sound real to me. But it is. It's very real to our listeners who are listening. Let me read this about the Queen.
Yeah, go for it.
The Queen and Church of England. The sovereign holds the title Defender of the Faith and Supreme Governor of the Church of England. I'm not sure how to interpret that, but that's her title. That's what she is to the Church of England.
Yeah. And I'm like, and you were uncomfortable with what the Catholic Church said about the Pope? I'm like, that seems like it's crossing a line there. But from all I've heard about Queen Elizabeth, actually, she seems like pretty solid. Yeah.
From what I can tell, and
never had lunch with her, but
yeah, from the from the 7 minutes I watched with my wife about The Crown on Netflix about her life, she seems really solid to me.
I tried to watch that show, and it's too boring.
Oh my gosh, don't get me started. I'm probably gonna offend a lot of people, but those Reddit shows just I like some British shows are like funny, like The Office started in that's a British show,
but some of them are just dry.
Oh my gosh, like what's the what's the one that got really popular?
Oh, Downton Abbey.
Oh my gosh,
never watched it.
It's just so boring.
Yeah,
if someone could explain why Downton Abbey, you watch Downton Abbey, or what Queen Elizabeth title actually means,
yes,
we would love to know.
You will become listener of the month.
You will become the de facto listener of the month for July or August or whatever.
Yeah, or maybe both, depending on how good your answers are.
Oh, and this is a good time to say too, we for the summer will go every other week.
Yeah.
So if you're wondering why we're releasing podcasts every other week, for the summer, instead of taking a whole break, we're going to go every other week.
Yeah. Yeah. We're going to spend our time tanning on the Monday mornings that we're off. Yeah. It's summer, you know.
Could you imagine? Just two pastors on top of the roof of this building.
What are they doing? Well, it's summer, you know. It's got to relax a little bit. All right, a few distinctives about Anglicanism. So the Book of Common Prayer, which we've mentioned, has been used for centuries, and it's acknowledged as the tie that binds the communion together liturgically. I will say, I'm using this book that is like a daily worship guide. It was one of the books of the month a few months ago that I mentioned. And it brings in some prayers from the Book of Common Prayer.
Cool.
And it's kind of neat, actually. I mean, the Book of Common Prayer has some really great... Evangelicals in the United States tend to get kind of weirded out about, like, reading someone else's prayer, especially if they've been, like, dead for a long time.
Yeah.
But I have found it to be helpful in seasons where I'm, like, my prayer life is a little drier than I'd like it to be. It kind of helps guide me.
Yeah.
So... Book of Common Prayer is very important to the Anglican
I think
communion.
I think this is a good reminder too that, like, I feel like whenever you're living in the present, you always think you're like the pinnacle of society, of creation.
We finally figured it out.
Religion, yeah. And I think there's just something to, like, we're standing on the shoulders of the people who came before us.
Yeah.
And I think even stuff like the Book of Common Prayer reminds us that, there were, like,
really solid Christians.
Really solid Christians.
Yes.
From a long time ago.
Yeah.
From, and I think it's just a good reminder of that.
Yeah. Yeah. In the Anglican communion, there are two sacraments, or they call means of grace. So baptism and the Lord's Supper, which they probably call the Eucharist. The other 5 Catholic sacraments are seen as important religious rites. So I think one thing you'll notice about Anglicanism is that they seem a little more sympathetic to some Catholic parts than an average, like, American Protestant would be.
Which is funny because once again, as the Reformation happened, they wanted to reform the church, not split from the church.
Yes.
And so a lot of the denominations, I feel like, in the South, there's a lot of Southern Baptists, for example, and that's, like, way far away in some ways of like the practicality of how Catholicism worked. But a lot of these denominations we're going to talk about, have kept a lot of things from historically the Catholic Church, not necessarily the current Catholic Church.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah, that's a good point. As far as the Lord's Supper goes, Anglicans do believe that Christ is present in the Lord's Supper, but they don't hold to the Roman Catholic view of transubstantiation. And some believe that a specific change in the elements takes place at the moment of consecration, but it seems like the official Anglican teaching holds that there's no change in the actual elements. The presence of Christ is present in the heart of the one who partakes through faith, as Trevin Wax says. So that's interesting. The Lord's Supper is like this constant mystery debate.
Yeah.
Feels like no one really solves.
Yeah. We'll know one day.
One day.
In the eternity future, we'll know.
One day. So they hold to the 66 books of the Bible. They don't recognize the intertestamental or the deuterocanonical or the apocryphal books as inspired, but they do recommend them for reading.
Yeah.
Which is also funny. It's like, again, more like sympathetic to the Catholic side.
Yeah.
I feel like most Protestants are like, be afraid.
Right.
Like, I'll make a confession here. I'll make a live confession on this live podcast where you can call in, as one person asked me one time. I won't share this person's name. I've never read any of the Apocrypha.
I haven't either. The only Apocrypha that I've read is, like, I forgot. It's like Jude references one of the books, right? And,
yep.
So I've read, like, pieces of it.
Mm-hmm.
And it's interesting. I mean, this is a whole nother discussion, but it's like, if Jude references an apocryphal book,
yes,
and Jude is scripture, does that mean that is scripture? I'm like, man, that's an interesting conversation to have.
I spent 3 weeks on Jude in our first year at the church, and when I got to that one, I was a good bit of time at my study. So I'd invite you to go to christfellowshipga.org/sermons. I think it's /sermons. But you can look up Jude, and I think where I landed, if I remember correctly, is just because Jude cites it doesn't mean he's acknowledging it as Scripture.
Right.
Just like we could cite a common story in our culture that our culture tells and retells.
It doesn't mean everything's true.
It doesn't mean
just,
it's yeah.
But
yeah,
actually,
those are kind of interesting, you know.
Yeah, you know, it actually happens a lot because even in Psalms, for example, it uses this imagery that was common in that day's culture, but it was to show, oh, you have this God. No, we have the one true God, right?
Mm-hmm.
But that doesn't mean that it's affirming,
right,
you know, their religion or whatever. It's you using what is in your culture in that day to tell the actual truth.
Right. I mean, this is what Paul does in Athens, right? When he gets to Athens in the book of Acts. Yeah, we should do a podcast on the Apocrypha.
We should.
Yeah.
Yeah.
We should probably read it first, then do a podcast on it. So the bishops and priests can be married, unlike the Roman Catholic Church. Many provinces,
unless you're Peter,
unless you're the first pope was allowed to be married, and then the rest just couldn't. that one. Oh,
sorry, it's just that had to
say
it to chuckle to
take
myself.
A little poke. Some like provinces or what they call dioceses ordain women as priest and bishop, and others don't. We'll get a little bit to that when we get to the Episcopal overshoot in the U.S. And then they kind of adopt like a middle ground between like Lutheranism and Calvinism. So Anglicans are kind of in the middle here.
But I know, like, so for example, like, let me make sure, because I know, for example, RTS, Reformed Theological Seminary, they initially, like, in Atlanta, used Church of the Apostles building as their, like, school building.
Right.
And so I'm like, I mean, they have to be, I'm
complementarian. Yeah.
Complementarian and Calvinistic, at least. You know?
Right.
So I'm guessing there's kind of a
spectrum
for Anglicans where theologically where they land on all this stuff.
Yeah. Yeah, so I mean, as far as famous figures go, Thomas Cranmer, I think it's Cranmer. I think that's how you say it. Thomas Cranmer, Richard Hooker, C.S. Lewis. I mean, hello. J.I. Packer, John Stott, N.T. Wright. All Anglicans.
Oh, I didn't know.
That's a pretty stacked list.
Yeah. You know, it's funny. I didn't know J.I. Packer or N.T. Wright were Anglicans.
So, and then Trevin Wax points out subgroups of Anglicans. So there is the Episcopal Church USA, which kind of, I think, started as like the American version of Anglicanism. It's a mainline Protestant denomination today, known often for its theologically and politically liberal positions. Listen to this. It is under censure, the Episcopal Church, by the rest of the Anglican communion for, quote, a fundamental departure from the faith and teaching by the rest of the Anglican communion regarding marriage and sexuality. So let's just say, the Revolutionary War wasn't the only split in between the seas. They are not happy with them.
Yeah.
But yeah, the Episcopalian Church, if you go to an Episcopalian church in the U.S., like respectfully speaking, I'm not sure you can find like a solid Episcopal church anymore. Maybe I'm wrong.
Yeah, like biblically.
Let us know.
Yeah.
I mean, let me know. But
I've not heard of one.
Yeah. I mean, it seems like they have gone so far. Yeah. But that is an offshoot of Anglicanism. And then you have the Anglican Church of North America, which developed in response to the Episcopal Church and recent controversies over sexuality. And I think like Trinity Anglican is a part of the ACNA. I could be wrong.
Which one?
Trinity Anglican. I think they're a part of this
okay.
Anglican Church of North America.
Gotcha.
I think that's like a more conservative branch of it.
All right, so I just looked up Church of the Apostles because I've been saying they're Anglican this whole time, and it turns out that they're not Anglican, or we don't know.
Right.
There is
So maybe they are, maybe they're not. It
what
seems like they're
happened
not.
was, I think someone in the past told me that the Church of the Apostles is Anglican, and I think there is an Anglican church called the Church of the Apostles.
I mean, I'm sure they are.
But
there is.
I don't think it's the one we're referencing with Michael Youssef in Atlanta. So
Do you
offer
think,
that? I'm going to offer that correction and say I don't know, and maybe they're not Anglican. So,
I mean, the Church of the Apostles, that's a bold name choice, you know?
yeah.
I mean, you're like the Church of the Apostles.
Yeah.
You know, this is the one. I'm like, wow, I wish I could be
Yeah.
the Church of the Apostles. No, actually, great church in Atlanta.
No, it's wonderful.
Very grateful
Yeah.
for them. Yeah, for sure. Michael Youssef has been faithful preacher for many years. Any stereotypes on Anglicans? I mean, we kind of joked about the like Trinity Anglican is super like cool.
Right.
I do feel like, again, part of this like generational change, some people in our generation that also happen to like move into cities did kind of like the liturgical part. So sometimes you meet people that are like both like Anglican and hipster. I know that's like way too broad.
You
but
know, that's actually kind of true.
it's a thing a little bit.
Yeah,
I think.
and I know there's Anglican churches out of the city. I just all the ones I know of are
like
like
in the city,
right on
yeah.
the perimeter. Like I'm talking specifically about Atlanta.
Right.
I don't know. I mean, you guys as the listeners, let us know. Is there like an Anglican church in the rural areas near you,
there is
or in the suburbs?
The parish is in Alpharetta.
And that's Anglican?
It's Anglican.
Okay.
But yeah, I mean, I don't know. That's a stereotype that's in my mind.
Yeah.
Don't know if it's true or not.
But it makes sense too, because the fact that you have the Episcopal Church, which is the Anglican Church, it's just the U.S. one.
Right.
You don't have a lot of like straight up Anglican churches because of the Episcopal Church until
Right.
they split or whatever.
Exactly.
And then you have Anglican churches again. So that would make sense to me too.
Yeah.
Why it's like quote unquote smaller in America
Yeah.
or U.S.
Right.
Yeah.
So I don't know, but there you go. There's Anglicanism. So interesting enough to talk about. We will be back at our next podcast talking about Lutheranism. So excited to talk about it. And if you have any questions, comments, feedback, stuff you'd like to share, please, please, please email us, info@christfellowshipga.org. We would love to hear from you. Thanks for listening. Until next time, we'll talk to you then.